Down here and wake you up. So, good afternoon. My name is Eric Camont. I am a solution specialist in the Windows embedded business. I worked at Microsoft and we just had this session this afternoon on solutions for retail for Windows embedded. So hopefully you guys are in the right place. This is primarily a session about 200 level about Windows embedded solutions, retail environment, and we have some really cool demos that we'll talk about going forward, but just making sure you guys kind of get an overview of what's going on. So what are the objectives for this afternoon? Well, first and foremost, I want to make sure I educate all of you on some of the how Windows embedded can solve retail challenges, which hopefully those challenges will become evident as we talk. We'll also showcase some of those embedded solutions for retail. Olivier will actually be doing some very interesting demos that I think many of you will kind of pique your interest if you're into the industry. And then finally wrap up with an expansion on the integration of Windows embedded technology into the existing retail infrastructure. It doesn't do much good if you can't actually leverage it into something you already have today. So I always like to start off very basic and work my way up. So first things first, what does retail really mean? So I imagine if I asked you all what retail means to you, I will get a different answer. And so certainly for those of you in the industry, you'll tell me it's about supply chain, it's about this, it's about that. It's defined by the dictionary as the selling of goods directly to customers. Okay, great. But really, what does retail really mean? At the end of the day, when we boil it down, it's really all about the customers. Whether you're talking about a supply chain solution or you're talking about e-commerce or websites or point of service or point of sale or mobile, it's all about the customers buying a good. Whether you're the consumer or you're the retailer interacting with that consumer, it's all about the customer. And how do we know it's all about the customer? Well, what's interesting is that research is showing that there's this huge drive towards customers. There was a study done and published just last month where they talk about some of the top challenges for retail over the next 3 years. So kind of this crystal ball into the future. And what's interesting is the word consumer or customer are in about half of these. And other things like, for example, I want to empower my customers. That obviously has to deal with customers. PCI compliance. How do I protect my customers? I want to do fighting against inflation, making sure that the dollar that the customer is spending is actually going to go further. So the idea is that there's a lot of challenges that all these retailers have reported that's important to them. Interestingly enough, those challenges are then boiled down to some very top store system priorities for the future. Interestingly enough, when we take a look at this over the course of the last 5 years, which is essentially what this slide shows here, number one is offering better tools for associates, making the associates capable of answering questions or embracing their customers in a much more empowered way. PCI compliance, we already talked about that. Security. For those of you in the retail industry, this is probably no surprise or shock to anybody here. CRM loyalty programs, for example, are a big priority that has been historically because they want to know who the customer is. Are they coming back to buy more product? What are they buying? How often are they buying? How much can I upsell them? So these are some of the challenges that we see with organizations in retail tackling to embrace their customer. And as such, when we think about the customer, we need to understand, essentially, how does a customer kind of purchase product? What is the process, the mindset in which they go through? So this slide is intended to kind of show you a very basic left to right workflow, if you will, very nicely done in Visio, of research all the way through the actual post-sale process. And for many of us, it's just probably a natural occurrence, but when you break it down, it has so many touch points. For example, on the left-hand side, when I talk about research, well, how often does someone go on and say, hey, I want to buy a new dryer? Well, you ask your brother-in-law, hey, what kind of dryer do you have? You ask friends. I go on Facebook, for example, or I go to a website, or I do some consumer reports comparisons, all the way through the shop process, in which case I will be looking at maybe leveraging Groupon, which has all of a sudden become very popular, or I can look at other features in aisle location. Maybe once I'm in a store, I want something to present me some information about where I'm shopping or where the products are. And of course, that point of decision, am I or aren't I going to buy the product? And so what helps you drive a sale or potentially an upsell? Well, promotions, demonstrations, right? Obviously, I'm demonstrating technology to you guys today in hopes that you'll adopt it. I mean, these are just natural ways to interact with people. making sure you get the right questions answered, so on and so forth. So you kind of get the idea of this flow on how a customer makes a decision. Incidentally, though, this is not just a start and finish process. This is a big cycle that retailers understand. And ultimately, the retailer's objective in all of this is to make sure that they can influence and empower customers during the entire complete shopping cycle. And they do that through a consistent experience across all the touch points. And so you're asking yourself, that's great. I understand what retail is about and what a retailer wants to do. How does Windows Embedded kind of come in here and play? Well, those touch points are where Windows Embedded is embraced and leveraged for technology. So when we think about the beforehand, maybe it's social networking and shopping lists and those kind of things. When we move into the actual purchasing process, where I'm going to walk into a store, you see on the right-hand side, we talk about kiosks, mobile commerce, self-checkout, traditional point-of-sale devices. These are what we call embedded devices. And what's interesting is those are multiple touch points that vary based on retail to retailer or different areas in a retailer. For example, self-checkout may not be very prominent in a department store, but you're very often seeing that in a grocery store. Kiosks. If I ask you, what is a kiosk? I imagine I'll get 6 different answers because a kiosk kind of means something different to everybody in the audience. And so we have all these touch points that evolve. And what's interesting about those touch points is that it's great. We don't want them to be a static moment in time. We want them to be dynamic. For example, they show the example if you're on the top right. Hey, we're at a grocery store selling bagels, but maybe we baked too many. We got a new guy, he made too many bagels, we got too many before they expire. Why don't I go ahead and drop the price on them to sell the rest of my batch before they go bad? All I'm going to do is throw them out or let them sit on the shelf. Or more likely, when I talk about something like mobile commerce, is I'm driving intelligence perhaps about who is my customer. So when I walk in a store, they have an idea of who I am, and so they know, hey, Eric likes to, he buys bricks from this home improvement store. He's bought a bunch in the last couple of months. Maybe we should give him a break on buying some more, right? They do those point-in-time kinds of breaks to help make sure that they keep that customer. All of that is driven by varying touch points that the customer is experiencing. And so what do we, out of all of that, the touch points and some of the history about retail being all about the customers, we can kind of boil the ocean down and say, well, what are some of the trends we see in retail and hospitality? Well, the first and foremost, and if this isn't obvious, I will hit you in the head again with this, is that there's a big power shift to the consumer. Years and years ago, one would argue that retailers pretty much had all the power. They knew essentially how the process was going to be run. They knew who their expert suppliers were. They knew that they could somehow compete better, and they were more well-informed than the individual customer was. The customer went to them and asked them questions. As such, the internet's come around, access to the mobile phone. They're walking to a store and they're doing price comparison with an app. And they know that if I can't get it at store A, I can go to store B and get the exact same product for a different price and perhaps cheaper, better service or whatnot. So there's a big power shift. And that power shift is exponentially changing the business models that a retailer has to abide by, right? These processes that retailers have experienced in the past no longer apply. For example, what used to be, hey, we don't have that in stock, we'll special order that for you. That'll take 10 days to come into stock. It doesn't fly with a lot of consumers who want just-in-time types of transactions. They're like, well, you know what? I appreciate that. According to my phone, I can go right next door to your competitor and get the product that I want tomorrow. And so what you see is all the business models, supply chain and sales processes and CRM, all have to change at a dynamic pace. And of course, as a result, operational efficiency and productivity have to go up. Retailers can't compete alone on having kind of all the knowledge anymore. They have to be able to compete by driving operational inefficiencies out of the business. And so they do that by making sure that at Christmas time, for example, they can get you through a transaction line much faster. If I can save 2 or 3 seconds on every transaction times 1,000 people, that adds up to a ton of minutes that perhaps would not have happened had that store closed earlier. So I can get people through a checkout line at a much more rapid pace, and that means I'm ringing sales much faster. Keeps my customers happy, keeps my board of directors happy, and it's a win-win for everybody. And essentially, when you talk about point of service, which is traditionally the point of that most people embrace in a store, it becomes the point of decision. I was in a retailer, real story. the other day, and I was standing in line, and you walk into the department store, and someone says, "Hey, let me know if you have any questions, if you need any help." And I'm like, "Of course, thank you very much. Go on your merry way. I don't want to talk to you." And of course, I get my product, and I'm ready to get in line, and there's like 15 people in line. There's 4 point-of-sale registers, and only 3 of them are open. And it's a little queue process. And essentially, this whole experience that I'm going through is impacting my persona, my perception of how they are, my customer service. Every minute that I got to stand in line longer just makes me more and more irritated. Because I know, for me being in the industry, that they could have solved this problem 100 different ways, but they didn't. And of course, when they get to the line, would you like a credit card? Would you like this? Would you like to save 25%? And then just, can we have your email address? And I walk up there and I'm like, no to everything, just ring my sale. Which, had that experience been better, I may have been a better customer. It may have been better for them to know who I am. So essentially, I walked out of there with my product, they rang a sale, but they know nothing about me. They didn't know I was irritated. They didn't know how long I stood in line. And so that has negatively impacted them. And so point of service is now the point of decision. And so when we talk about a point of service device, it's more than just point of sale. We see mobile point of sale, we see kiosks, thin clients, digital signage, things that we'll talk about today. And essentially, I kind of came up and said, this is really easy. Retail is all about customers, and it's really all about knowing, serving, and protecting who those customers are. I want to know my customer. I want to make sure I take care of my customer and protect them, whether that's through security or thievery or make sure they have a safe experience in the store or whatnot. Those are my 3 trends out of what retail is all about. And as such, that is going to drive the conversation for the rest of the presentation today. So, retail ecosystem. So let's take a snapshot back in time briefly. So for those of you in retail, on the left-hand side, mainframes were something that's been around for decades. And some of you still use them. Some of you might be getting rid of them. Some of you may have gotten rid of them years ago. But mainframes represent kind of this monolithic experience in a store. It's this big experience. It's got a big footprint, big power, big money. And every device in the store is identical. It's the same dumb terminal that has to access and be interacted with in the exact same way. The advent of PCs came around, and we saw the push go from monolithic to individual devices. So now the PCs kind of said, I can still connect to that device, but I can get more of a customized experience based on the areas of the business. Front of the house, maybe a cash register, maybe a back office PC at the loading dock. All of a sudden, I have 3 different types of footprints and devices. Well, that gave way towards a much more independent and individual experience via phone. I'd imagine many of you, if you walked into a retailer, do that with some type of intelligence from your mobile device. You've done your research. I want to go buy a TV, and so-and-so says, well, we're not going to price match that. Well, you price match this. Your competitor has it right here. And you'll do that just-in-time type of price comparison. And we see that the experience on the phone is very personalized. It goes from individual to individual instead of many individuals to one device. And so what we've also seen in all 3 of these is the data has moved. In mainframes, monolithic, data was centralized, it was always there. PCs, we put them into a data center. Phone, data center, and the internet, potentially private and or public cloud. And so what we've seen here is an evolution of the cloud and where all the data lies and all the processing lies is elsewhere. That device is no more than just a view into what that information looks like. And that data is someplace else. And based on that, we've seen the growth of what we call the Internet of Things. Essentially, these specialized devices that connect to the internet and allow me to make decisions and interact with things in a very specific way. So specialized devices, as you can see along all these devices at the bottom, are very specific, from digital picture frames to a handheld device to a GPS, a self-checkout device, you got a gas pump over there. And they're all a specialized device to solve a particular problem. And all of those devices run Windows Embedded. And so when we ask, specifically, what kind of experiences and devices run Windows Embedded, we can kind of talk about them categorically. On the left-hand side, you see a lot of these kind of phone, handheld, user, consumer devices. In the middle, you've got a little bit more of a ruggedized industrial point of view. And on the right-hand side, you've got much more interactive types of devices. The point is, no matter what the device is, there's always a solution and a need for it in a retail experience. Below that, you have services and infrastructure. You can't do much with a device if you can't connect it to something, and that infrastructure and service is very, very important. And then down below, that user interface is critical. Think about how many times you walk in somewhere and, the keyboard and mouse has been around for decades, but you no longer interact with your phone with a keyboard and mouse. You use gesturing, flick, pinch to zoom. The Microsoft Kinect, for example, for 360 is all gesture-based. You can speak to it. So being able to interact with an experience in a retail store, however the consumer wants, is key. And so they're going to use whatever types of interfaces that they want. And so we have three really good examples of this in the press where a lot of, we kind of see these trends taking off. At the top, we talk about Home Depot. They went through a huge handheld expansion, spent a ton of money. For what? To increase customer service. What did they run on? Windows Embedded. Target, who does very little public PR for anybody, talked about how they bet their business on our Hyper-V virtualization stack. They essentially went ahead and bet their business on a private cloud inside their stores, leveraging virtualization for devices, and they created their own services infrastructure that we talked about here. And then we talk about natural user interface. Intel and Microsoft put together this very smart sign technology for a digital signage experiment. And on the right-hand side there, I know the video is kind of small. It'll scroll through eventually here. But the gentleman is actually in front of a smart screen, and he's trying on different clothes. And if you'll see, he'll actually take a piece of wear, and he'll be able to turn and move, and it'll actually show what it looks like on his body. So imagine how many teenage girls could walk into a store and say, I want to try on this dress for prom, or try on this dress for prom, or I can do this from the comfort of my home. All of a sudden, now you've been able to sell that consumer to come back to your store because they know that they're going to get a great experience or something that's unique. So that said, we talk about the connected retail experience. We have all the services infrastructure, and in this slide here, we talk about three specific examples. We have a quick service restaurant on the left, a traditional department store kind of retailer, and then we have an airport. Because yes, an airport is kind of this glorified retail experience. And they all have little touch points all over the place. But they all essentially have the same architecture. A bunch of devices connect to a server that connects to a back-end server someplace at corporate, which essentially runs some type of back-end software, whether that's point-of-sale software, sales, CRM, ERP. You guys get the picture. The architecture is essentially pretty basic. But those devices kind of fall into four key categories: digital signage, handheld, point-of-sale, and kiosk. And you can say that digital signage and kiosk or point-of-sale and kiosk might evolve, and that's absolutely true. So all of those run Windows Embedded. So of course the question becomes, what is Windows Embedded? We can certainly boil the ocean down here, but it's an operating system that offers familiar tools, and highlighted in yellow, that deliver the power of Windows and the cloud to specialized devices. Windows Embedded is still Windows. And for many of you who may have never even seen Windows Embedded or you're used to it, it's not Windows in the traditional sense that you're used to on your PC. Special versions of Windows designed for devices. And we feel that the power of Windows combined with the power of cloud enable this specialized devices category. So, analogously, sometimes people are like, well, so really, what's the difference between Windows Embedded and Windows? So, many of us, I always like to draw these analogies from when we were kids. So how many of you had Legos as children? Come on, I know you all had Legos as kids. And so the idea is if you had a box of Legos, you bought a Legos, and on the thing on the front of the box, had 45,000 pieces. You spent 8 hours on Christmas morning assembling them all, and then that was it, right? And essentially, if you used every piece in the box, you got what was on the front cover of that Lego box. But you get the idea. Those pieces could essentially be torn back apart into anything that they wanted to. And on the back of the box, you may have been saying, oh, well, if I use a third of these pieces, I can build something else. Maybe not with all the pieces, but I can use some of them to build something very creative and different from what I intended to in the first place. So the idea is this is a parallel to Windows. We use big windows, we blow it into little pieces, and that you can then use as kind of and assemble into different designs technology. So we would use Windows Embedded to build a kiosk, a digital sign, a point-of-sale device. Does that make sense? So when we talk about the Legos, if you will, I also like to talk about the Windows Embedded family, so make sure everybody's kind of level set on what is Windows Embedded. So on the left-hand side, we have Windows Embedded Compact. For those of you familiar with CE, does that kind of ring a bell? We just changed the name to Windows Embedded Compact. We wouldn't be Microsoft if we didn't change the name every 6 months on something, right? So we have this product family, and the horizontal solution is Embedded Compact. The vertical solution is Windows Embedded Handheld, which used to be Windows Mobile, not to be confused with Windows Phone. Those kind of split, just to verify. There are sessions on Windows Phone that'll be a little different. And then Windows Embedded Automotive. And so for those of you who may have seen articles or have a car with a Ford Sync, that's based on Windows Embedded Automotive, which is essentially based on Windows Embedded Compact. So what is Compact used for? Well, we use Compact for real-time operating systems. So think robots, industrial automation, elevator controls, defibrillators, windmills, things that require real-time small operating system. And it's designed for alternative processors. So a lot of PCs run Intel x86, x64 processors. Compact is designed to run ARM, MIPS, Xscale, so on and so forth, including Intel x86 and x64 processors. So it's tiny OS, real-time, multiple processors. The next family is Windows Embedded Standard. And Windows Embedded Standard is probably what many of us are used to when we think about Windows for embedded. It looks like big Windows, but essentially it's just pieces of big Windows put to use. The vertical solution there is Windows Embedded Pause Ready, which we'll talk about today. For those of you who may have heard of WePause in the past, a Pause Ready was the rebranding of that technology. And so we see this in what you would typically see larger x86, x64, larger RAM footprints, larger hardware footprints. So things like ATMs and kiosks, point-of-service devices, entertainment devices, so on and so forth. And then the other two families that often don't get recognized, and we're not going to talk about much today, but just to kind of round out the entire family, Windows Embedded Enterprise, which is essentially full Windows for embedded systems, and then Windows Embedded Server, which are servers for embedded scenarios, right? So I create a gas pump, and that's going to be an embedded and has some specific controller that's going to serve some needs. That would be a Windows Embedded Server. Not to be confused with a server that runs in a store would not necessarily be an embedded server because it does a multitude of things. And of course, as I expressed below, that little arrow talks about source control, CPU architectures, all the way to the right where it's big Windows desktop compatibility. Does that make sense for a lot of people in the audience? All right. So this slide is an eye chart, and I only wanted to draw one point about this, was that when we talk about devices for retail and hospitality, for example, kiosk has 3 categories in there, column 2, 3, and 4. And what's interesting, if you look at the bottom, maybe that's a little bit of Embedded Pause Ready, maybe that's a little bit of Windows Embedded Enterprise, maybe that's a little bit of Windows Embedded Standard. It kind of depends what you want to do with the solution. The point is, when you're creating solutions for retail, whether it's digital sign, kiosk, handheld device, whatever, it may use one or more of different flavors of Windows Embedded. So the point is not to be scared and say, hey, a thin client only runs this version of Windows Embedded. It may not necessarily be the case. You can run a family of them. So that was the only point of kind of to drive this home. So that said, let's talk about the thing that everybody wants to talk about when they think about retail, which is point of service. So there's been this evolution of point of service devices over time. Obviously, we have this antiquated register here that was designed simply to ring a sale, but had no concept of who the customer was, the transaction, didn't even know how much money was in the drawer. And that slowly evolved to a bit more intelligent device. It's barcode scanner. I can run a credit card, for example, take some type of payment. Maybe there's a cash drawer. Maybe there's a larger LCD screen that I'm used to. And that's kind of given way to a whole new experience where I have an ergonomic checkout lane. I've got, if you notice on the right-hand side, there's 2 monitors, one facing the associate, one facing the actual customer. They've got rid of the pin pad process because now they can actually use the screen to sign their names, for example, instead of having to go back and forth with a stylus and touch this and touch that. At the bottom right, I'm not sure if you see at the bottom, there's a little window, which is essentially a bottom of the basket camera. So when someone's rolling through a grocery store and they have stuff on the bottom of the basket, they can do detection and automatically tell you what kind of product is in the bottom of the basket. So things like that. And so RIS and IHL kind of came up with this concept where they see POS as essentially the single most important point of customer interaction. We kind of drove this home when we saw that the point of service was the point of decision. But research, third-party firms, all of our competitors, everybody in the retail industry is essentially saying point of service is critical. You've got to get this right or you're going to lose out in the business. Obviously, security and compliance come up as well. I doubt, is anybody here not worried about PCI or security in their retail stores? It's like, I'd love to shop there. That was a joke. People were supposed to laugh. Okay. So essentially, for those of you who are in retail, know very much about PCI and DSS. And it talks about a series of topics from maintaining a secure network to how do you protect the cardholder data, and so on and so forth. I don't have to read these off to you, but the idea is protect the data, whether it's at rest while it's in movement. Don't hand out credit card numbers. Make sure they're protected. Don't hand out personally identifiable information about the person, so on and so forth. PCI, interestingly enough, is not something, obviously, Microsoft has a solution for. I mean, in the sense that we don't just have a piece of software, here's PCI. It's a process. And this applies to whether you use Microsoft technology or anybody else's. And I would argue that PCI is not something to be scared about. There's a lot of, lot of projects in the way that have been for years about how do we get PCI compliant, how do we take care of this, and how do we deal with the auditors, and all this kind of stress. And essentially, all PCI is a paradigm shift. The industry is already moving to consumers. Now all we're doing is making sure all the legal processes can protect the consumers that we're seeing the industry focus on. And so it does require some extra hoops sometimes to go through. But for many of you who may have implemented security protocols and those kind of things for PCI, it's not overly difficult. It's just a different thought process. But we use that in mind that our point of service systems also have to be able to support that. And so as such, we have Windows Embedded POS Ready. And this summer, we're going to launch POS Ready 7. And so POS Ready as a family was WePOS, POS Ready 2009, and now POS Ready 7. And so I'm just going to spend a few minutes and talk about POS Ready 7, and then we're going to show you guys a demo. That's your flag, Olivier. And we're going to focus on 4 key areas: the customer experience, the connected experience, security, and efficiency. So POS Ready 7 takes heart from Windows 7. So for those of you familiar with Windows 7, a lot of the similar technology is going to be available in POS Ready 7. One of the things that does raise some interesting eyebrows is now the availability of 64-bit on a point-of-sale system. Of course, you're going, why? And we see that point-of-service can also be a digital sign, for example, or they're buying hardware that wants to be protected for the next 5 years. So now we see larger investments in RAM. 64-bit technology is almost a necessity. Got to make sure it's easy to install. The installation process should be as easy as it was for me when I was installing a Windows 7 client in corporate. If I can leverage the same technology and the same processes and the same software and same management infrastructure to do that, I'm already one step ahead of my competitors. We offer it in a multitude of languages. For those of you, I know for our gentleman here from Brazil, not everybody speaks English, right? So we've got to make sure we think about the rest of the world when we deal with this, and being able to embed the multilingual user interfaces into the image is critical. So we support a ton of languages. From an experience perspective, we have Windows Touch. And Windows Touch was integrated in Windows 7. And for those of you in the past have used point-of-sale devices, touching a device is not like a new concept. It's been around for quite some time. The idea, however, is that now the OS, instead of some driver for some monitor, is doing all that work for you. And not only is it single touch, it's now multi-touch. So now I can support multiple points of interface. So that allows me to do a signature, for example, or I can do something where I want someone to verify themselves with some type of enumerated passcode with finger strokes, for example, where multi-touch may be a necessity. From a protection side, we see AppLocker and BitLocker come to the forefront. And AppLocker is essentially our whitelisting and blacklisting technology in Windows 7 that's been ported to POS Ready. So that essentially allows you to say, I only want these 10 processes to execute on this device, and that's it. On a point-of-service device, you would think, it's a form-function device, I should be able to lock down these 10 things it's supposed to do. AppLocker allows you to do that via group policy. BitLocker is our security mechanism that allows you to protect the hard drive from being loaded someplace else and hacked. So in a retail scenario, we can all kind of agree on that we never know who's going to run into a retail store. And therefore, from a security perspective, can't really be trusted. Someone's going to run into a store and snatch and grab a register and run out the door with hopes of snagging credit card numbers. And so they know they can't log onto the device. They take a hard drive out, they pop it into their Linux box. Well, BitLocker creates a hash between the hardware and all the pieces and the hard drive. And essentially, it's encrypted. And the only way you can unencrypt it is with the actual key that's on that device. As soon as they take that hard drive someplace else, all they're going to see is hash data. So you're protecting your data even though they stole a cash register. Power management's key. Lots of retailers find that they can save millions of dollars in the course of a year by turning off all the registers at nighttime. Or they find that I don't want to buy new hardware because it's got a higher power draw and it's going to charge me, more for power in the store times so many stores, so many dollars per year. So Windows 7 implemented this concept of core parking, which is essentially for multi-core devices where I'm not using the cores that are needed, I can turn them off. And so you'll see a power fluctuation in a Windows 7-based device on when it's needed. And so, when you buy a multi-core device, while it's great and fast and robust, it does have a bigger energy draw. It'd be nice to be able to manage that. POS for .NET. For those of you familiar with OPOS or Java POS or any of those other POS standards out there in the retail world, POS for .NET is our implementation of OPOS essentially for .NET. And every time OPOS revs, we rev POS for .NET. So if you're .NET developers or you're using a point-of-sale application that's based on .NET, you can also leverage POS for .NET as well. We're going to showcase 3 of these concepts here during our demo: write filters, dialog filter, and keyboard filter. Write filters are essentially a technology that sits between the hardware and the operating system that allows changes to that OS to be committed or flushed. So imagine you have a state of a device and someone's using it and making changes. Maybe it's a kiosk. And you want to make sure all those changes that were made don't get saved or committed to the actual operating system. Well, with a write filter in place, you can just reboot the device. It'll go back to what it was beforehand. And so in a point-of-service situation, and particularly in embedded devices, we find write filters to be critical to maintain the consistency and the state of that device. A dialog filter is designed to help suppress any oddball dialog boxes that might pop up. So for example, you have an associate, they're logging through a point-of-sale application, and all of a sudden, your antivirus is out of date pops up. Well, that's a bit annoying, considering they don't have a mouse to go ahead and actually get rid of that box. So what do? We can use a dialog filter to suppress all those message boxes and make sure they're logged properly, but to suppress them so it doesn't interfere with the purpose of that device. And a keyboard filter is a magical little thing that we implemented that will help prevent oddball keystrokes from being implemented. So you have a kiosk, and some high school wise guy runs over there and presses Control-Alt-Delete, starts Task Manager, trying to hoke around with your device. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to turn off Control-Alt-Delete or Alt-F4 or some other keystrokes that you need that some associate learned that's causing you problems? We can do that with a keyboard filter. And what's interesting about that, one more slide, I think, is that we have, he's ready to jump the gun, aren't you? So we have Windows 7 POS Ready 7, based on Windows 7, has Service Pack 1 already built in. So for those of you familiar with Windows 7, we RTM'd Service Pack 1 for it about 2 months ago. And one of the features that we enabled by Service Pack 1 inside of Windows 7 was this concept of Remote FX. So Remote FX, what is it? What's the value to me as a retailer? There's sessions at TechEd. So this is the first session of the day. Feel free to go, if this is interesting, go see it someplace else. But essentially, technology allows, in a terminal services fashion, to offload all the graphics processing to a backend server. So if you think about a traditional terminal services situation, you offload processor, RAM, I/O. But the local user input is still on that client device, as well as the graphics. And with the push for high-definition video, video training for store associates, digital signage, all these video high-definition experiences, the graphics weren't necessarily identical across those devices. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to also offload that to the back-end server as well? Remote FX allows you to do that, and ideally for free. It's built into the operating system now. So security as far as a POS Ready 7 image. This is unique to POS Ready 7 as well, and so I wanted to focus on it for a second. So when we think about the image for POS Ready, when we talk about security, what are the things that are important to you? Well, from a security perspective, when you go harden a device, and I know I had somebody asking about hardening, when I go ahead and harden a device, ideally I want to turn off services that I don't need. So let's say, for example, the wireless service is a perfect example of something I don't need probably on a point-of-sale device today. I might need that at some point in the future. I turn off the service, that's great, I mitigated that risk. Right, but it's only mitigated until someone breaks into the box and turns on the service and then uses that as a vulnerability to hack your device because you had it turned off. So instead, what we find is that we can use tools in the POS Ready 7 image to not only turn off a service, but to remove the binaries from the box. So in Windows 7, you can't do this today. In POS Ready 7, you can. You can remove the individual binaries as you needed. So for example, wireless service and all those wireless pieces are pulled out. That's great, and then when I need them back at another point in time, boom, I can add them back onto the box and turn it back on, and it helps me kind of keep my security footprint in flux. So the smaller that footprint is, the less risk I have, and then I'll add risk when I want it. And that's something you can do with POS Ready 7 as well. So now we're going to do demos. And so I'm going to invite Olivier Bloch to come up here, and he's going to show you a scenario with POS Ready for upgrading an existing point-of-sale device and how to go through the setup and the secure of that device. So Olivier,
hey,
thank you very much.
Eric. Thanks a lot. I won't say hi and present myself because it was just burn time from the demo. I actually discussed with Eric on what would be the best thing to show you during the session. Initially, we were thinking about showing you installing POS Ready. Actually, it's really boring because it's really easy. 2 clicks, done. It's installed. Adding a package, as Eric just mentioned, 2 lines of code, too easy. So we went for something more challenging, which is upgrading an existing kiosk that is running some kind of Windows OS, we don't know exactly what, upgrading using VHD boot. So basically, the way I'm going to deploy my new POS Ready 7 OS onto that device will be by just copying a VHD file and setting up the boot sector so that it boots from that VHD, right? So here, I have a kiosk that is running an application that is informational kiosk. Not very advanced. As a matter of fact, we don't have any keyboard filter activated. So if I press Alt F4 on this keyboard, it just kills my application that happens to be my shell. Not really comfortable, not really easy. You have some tools out there to put your device or your machine that's running Windows into a kiosk mode. These tools are really expensive, really difficult to set up. So basically what we're going to do is actually leverage what's in the box. Let me just shut down the device. My device here is an Acer Revo, really tiny PC, not too expensive, and that's perfect what I'm going to do. Let me just kill it and reboot from an SD card. As a maintenance guy, I might just need an SD card to boot from a maintenance OS, right? So I am that maintenance guy, put my hat on, come to the POS device. It has that old-fashioned OS in there. I put my SD card, reboot the hardware, and I can boot into my maintenance OS, which is based on Windows Embedded Standard 7, if it wants to boot. And as a matter of fact, that maintenance image is really secured, really locked down, being based on OS 7. From there, I'll be able to, it's a bad resolution, it's fine. I'll be able to set up my boot sector, copy my VHD file, wipe up the previous OS that was on the machine, and then reboot from the hard drive, from the machine itself. So I will just give it some time to boot. And in the meantime, I can explain exactly what was the process to build the OS 7 image. OS 7 is a little bit different to what POS Ready offers. POS Ready is pre-installable. OS 7 brings you through a process which is more detailed in terms of selecting the features you want to have. As a matter of fact, POS Ready is built out of OS 7 tools, right? We decided a set of features from OS 7 that would be useful and helpful for point-of-service machines, right? So when you install OS 7, basically you select the features you want to have, the drivers you want to have, and you create a really customized, really locked down OS that does only what you need. The maintenance guy with this OS actually is having something he cannot play any games with. He cannot use it in any other device than the one that actually I'm running it from. So really practical, really useful to get people more productive. So let me log in this machine. Okay. Thanks, keyboard not working. I'm typing too fast for it. I don't know why. So basically here, what I can see booting from my SD card is I can have a look at what's happening in terms of hard drive and partitions. I can see my actual SD partition from where I booted. I can see a system reserve partition and another one. The Windows system that was installed actually was using what we call a BCD partition, which actually enabled you to deal with multi-boot and so on and to secure the system. I will actually play around with the boot partition here and configure that in order to boot from a file that I already copied on the main drive, which is posimage.vhd. Okay? In order to do that, I will start a command prompt as admin, and I will go edit the BCD file. Using a tool that is in the box, which is called BCD Edit, I will go and look at the store I should not type too fast. And the store actually sits in D, into boot, BCD, right? Let me see what's in there. The BCD file actually describes, sorry. Interesting. D, D. Someone can tell me what the typo is? There we go. Sorry for that. So what I see here is the information about the boot manager and the different boot options. There's just one boot option here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this one, this entry, duplicate it, and then modify it. So if I go there and I say copy, I will copy the default one, and I will create a new one with a description which is something like VHD boot, for example. So it creates that new one, which is a new entry, a new option in my boot screen. Obviously, at the end of the day, I would get rid of the old one and just have the default option, the VHD boot, as my boot option. So what I need to do to set up this new VHD boot entry is to change what the boot device is. I need it to be no longer a partition. I want it to be a VHD file. So I want to say set device VHD, and the file, actually, if I'm good with that one, would be, it's a weird syntax that we have to use. And it's called pause image.vhd. Okay, set device. Oops, sorry. I need to do that. Copy the GUID, otherwise I don't know which one I'm changing. Okay, paste, and done. I discovered BCD Edit 2 days ago. So sorry for that, guys. I want to be sure I'm not messing it up. So it's write store, I'm saying set, it's going to be this one, the device will be a VHD, and it's VSG, yep, there we go. Okay, that's really interesting. Just did it again, sorry? Is it like, it's set for the GUID, and then device, and then VHD. Kind of weird. Am I missing something somewhere? Oh, it's all right. And then we have OS device, but I'm just curious to see. Let me just go back there. Sorry for that. I'm sorry. So VHD boot, it boots from a partition. Let me restart it from scratch. All right, Mark, I'm as an admin. I copied this guy. I set BCD edit. And it's going to be from the store, which is in D, boot, BCD. And I'm going to say set. And I select this guy, and I say device, which is what I want to set. It's going to be a VHD. And it's from E. And it's called pause image.vhd. Let me check the name of the file. Pause image.vhd, and it doesn't want to delete it. Come on. Okay, guys, sorry for that. I have no clue what happened. So let me do that. Real quick. Okay.
It says D here, not E.
Say it again? Is it D? No, it's fine. I'm good here. I'm good here. Let me clean it up and restart. I'm back with just one entry. I'm going to recopy the first one there. And I'm going to copy the default one. And that's maybe where I messed it up. No. D. And I'm going to call it pause ready 7 VG boot. Okay. Maybe I should do it faster. So copy the GUID. There we go. And here I need to do a set on this specific entry, and I will set store and good and device, and this one will be a VHD, and it's equals this thing here. VHD. Wow, I like it. Okay, guys, so I think I'm going to just don't do the VHD boot, which is kind of annoying because that kills the other demos. That's not cool. Okay, you know what? I'm going to shut it down and reboot the guy and see what's going on. And in the meantime, what I can do is I can give it back to you and see if it works out. Sorry for that, guys. Just messed it up. I just had one thing to do and failed. But I've got... I'll try at the end again, after the other one that worked.
That's an experiment in scripting right there. Apparently. So wow. So yes. So essentially, that was supposed to be a really cool demo. So y'all can go home now. So the show will go on. So essentially.
I got a question. So you were trying to transfer from what was on the SD to the actual physical machine, and then get it to come up and run, right?
Yeah. So the question was, what was he essentially trying to do? And the idea is that, and you can do this multitude of ways, but SD card with my VHD file that I would then service and upgrade a device, right? So for example, I wanted to go do an experiment, but I didn't want to wipe the whole thing. Maybe I'm in the lab. Maybe I'm going to use this as an upgrade path. Maybe I'm going to do this for whatever reason. Use the SD card. I boot into this image. You could be WinPE or whatever as well, and essentially set the BCD for the boot of the Windows 7 device, drop the VHD on there, and then boot into that VHD instead of booting into a new OS on the hard drive. So kind of decoupling this one-to-one correspondence between an OS and a hard drive. Now I could have multiple OSs to one hard drive because of the VHD file. So yeah, that works. So we have a video of it with him actually doing it. So that was the funny part. You have another question?
I've got a question just to clarify. When you boot it into the SD, are you booting into the operating system that's running POS7, or are you booting
No,
from the SD?
I'm booting from the OS that is on the SD card. Yes.
Yes. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So he asked, what was he booting into? And that was the SD card had its own OS that it was booting
That was a
into.
really cool demo.
Well then, I'm ashamed. All right. Well, moving on. It's a great demo, Olivier. So in the retail scenario, what are some other things that we can talk about? So digital signage is one of those topics that from when you talk about point of service, point of sale, what's the other big thing that everybody kinds to be talking about? Well, kiosks come to mind and digital signage. And what's a kiosk? What's a digital sign? Are they the same thing? Do they cross over? Is there a difference? And so what I wanted to do is kind of talk briefly about a digital signage as a technology for retail. And so as you see on the poster here, on the slide rather, we have this evolution in digital signage. And digital signage is one of these things when, once again, if I asked you what does digital signage mean to you, you'd have all kinds of answers. For example, I have a PowerPoint deck attached to a monitor that's in my store. Is that a digital sign? Sure. What are you trying to do with it? What are you trying to accomplish? Well, I want to, let people know about advertisements, or I want to try to give impressions to my customers. That's great. That PowerPoint is kind of static, point in time kind of scenario. So what do you do? So we've seen as a trend is that used to be the way it was done. It was a kind of a digitized poster, if you will. Well, that kind of gave way towards a standalone digital signage, which is essentially kind of the PowerPoint, or maybe it was running a DVD or a video on a loop, for example, highlighting some product that they wanted to showcase. The challenge with that is you didn't know who you were impressioning. You didn't know who was being targeted by the signage. You didn't know who was actually receiving that. You didn't know if it was landing. Didn't know if it was landing or not, right? And on top of that, those devices were pretty expensive. So you spent a couple grand on a device because it was this big 40-inch LCD screen. You wanted to have all this stuff, and all it did was show a video playing over and over again. Is that really what you want to accomplish? Well, the goals of digital signage have kind of changed. They said, okay, well, we want to update content. Okay, great. So now we network this thing, and now we have a content provider that's now dynamic. So we moved categorically to the networked digital signage. Great. So now I got a digital sign in all my stores. They're on the network. They're upgradable. I can update the videos whenever I want. That's fantastic. So now at least you're in the dynamic realm. Once again, who are you targeting? Who's looking at it? Do you know if it's landing? How just in time is that sale? Do they know that when those bagels, for example, we talked about before, that extra batch is created, how are they being notified? Digital sign, someone sticks a sticky on top of that. Bagels for sale, right? Because they can't update just in time that they have something going on there. So we move down to this last category, which is interactive digital signage, which is sort of where we are today. There's a big push to say, I want signage, but I want it to be interactive. And interactive could be, I want to touch it and manipulate it. You saw the demo with a gentleman putting on the clothes, and he was spinning side to side, trying on different clothes. Or it could be something even simpler, which says as soon as somebody walks into a bank, for example, it just does a camera recognition, if kind of some type of gender recognition that says, are you male or female? And maybe it'll highlight something for females and highlight something for males, or maybe it'll highlight something for kids or highlight something for adults, right? You don't even have to get to know, does this person look to be 52 and a half years old with gray hair, and blue shoes, right? You don't need to know that much about them. You could just get away with targeting them based on gender or height or something of that nature. Did they come with a family? Did they come by themselves? So we see that, and then, of course, being able to just in time alter that. So connecting that into a point-of-service system, an ERP supply chain system, those kind of things. So digital signage is on a big move. And so we see that Windows Embedded is a great solution set for digital signage for a series of things, and I'll kind of talk about this. So once again, when we think about the Lego analogy, I can kind of build Windows Embedded to build a digital sign. And what's important in the digital signage? Well, obviously, we find that media playback is pretty critical, whether that's some type of video, interactive movie, or whatnot. But it's got to support high-end hardware. So when we talked about 64-bit, high-end RAM, high-end graphics, you need to be able to support those technologies. Ideally, when I'm on the network, I don't want to take down my credit card transactions because someone's watching a digital advertisement or they're streaming down an update. So I need to make sure bandwidth reservation is critical. If I'm going to engage with my customers, I want to be able to touch it. So if I'm going to touch it, I want to make sure I do some type of gesturing to make sure those clothes are resized. Or if I'm looking at a map, how do I get from this point to where those olives are in a grocery store that I want to buy? Okay, I want to zoom in or zoom out on where I am. You've got to make sure the development environment is critical. So we use Silverlight as a common development experience. So use Silverlight on your website. Maybe you want to have a similar experience from your website to your digital sign so that it has a very similar look and feel to the customers. And of course, we want to make sure targeted advertising. And so we use input from sensors that we talked about with like the age and height and all those kind of things. Security, right? So as digital signs evolve to be interactive and kind of cut on this cusp of kiosks, one could kind of argue, well, how far is it from them going, I want to buy that shirt, swipe my credit card, or I want to use NFC from my mobile phone to pay for that device? Well, all of a sudden, now you have to worry about security because PCI. And so now we have to deal with connecting into the rest of my infrastructure to not only process that transaction, but to make sure it's connected, it's guaranteed. I need to make sure it's secure. And so we need to leverage networking technologies and policy compliance via like group policies, app locker, so on and so forth. So a lot of the things we saw in Pause Ready kind of also apply here to digital signage scenarios. And of course, in a digital sign, when you think about what it really is, this is device and a humongous television that's interactive perhaps, and how much it costs, you want to make sure you get your return on investment. Okay, I spent $5,000 on this thing, and it's static. No, I need to make sure it's dynamic, it's updatable, it's securable. I'm going to get 5 or 6 years out of this thing because otherwise, what's the point in justifying it? On top of that, big TV. You ever see how much power a plasma TV draws on in your house? You know how much heat those things expel? So when we talk about those kind of things, power consumption, when you're already arguing about turning off point-of-sale devices in a store, comes to mind. So how do we get rid of complexity and cost? We talk about this with Pause Ready 7. If I can leverage the same technology to deploy Windows in my corporate environment, I want to make sure I can do the same thing for my store environment and using those same tools. And of course, using industry standards. It doesn't matter if I can't support, for example, HTML5 or Silverlight or .NET or Java or those kind of things. So I need to make sure I support all those. So what's interesting about this is Thin clients by themselves aren't necessarily what I would consider a scenario for a retailer. Thin clients enable scenarios, right? So I might use a thin client as a point of sale. I might use a thin client as a kiosk. I might use a thin client as a digital sign. So I wanted to talk about thin clients real quick from an embedded perspective because they kind of touch on all those categories. So thin client, once again, what is a thin client? And I could ask you and you'll all tell me, oh, a thin client is this and thin client is that. Interestingly enough, what is really the intent of a thin client when we define it? Well, it's designed to be server-based, right? So a thin client by itself doesn't really do much, otherwise it'd be a PC. The idea is that it depends on some type of higher-end server infrastructure, whether that's local, private cloud kind of thing, public cloud kind of thing, but essentially it leverages some other server infrastructure. The profile of the device is also different. Smaller CPU, less RAM than a typical PC. Sometimes no storage or very little storage at all. Maybe just a 1 gig flash drive, or maybe there's no memory whatsoever because everything's done remotely off that server. And of course, they use less energy. So from a green perspective or carbon footprint or just a pure cost perspective, the thin clients are always less. And an operating system usually runs some lightweight embedded operating system, such as Windows Embedded Standard, which we were showcasing for that SD card thing. That part actually worked, by the way. And of course, who are some of our thin client vendors? HP, Weiss, Igil, Dell has some. I mean, there's a multitude of vendors that kind of come up with these thin client devices. So why is thin clients kind of important? Well, when we talked about trends in the marketplace before, I thought it would be good to kind of talk about trends here. Ideally, there's a thin client session on embedded right after this one, I think, down the hall. So if you're interested in knowing more about thin clients and those kind of things, there's a whole other session you can dig in much deeper, hence the reason why I'm only kind of covering this at a superficial level. But for those of you familiar with VDI, does VDI kind of resonate with people? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so VDI is this situation where in a virtual server farm, I could virtualize servers. Now there's a trend, I want to virtualize desktops. And so we see a big push to say, well, to manage desktops, maybe that's better for my organization to manage them in a virtual machines instead of on the actual device at the client point. So we see that VDI goes up. We see thin clients going up as a direct connection. Well, I don't need all the hardware. I can get away with a thin client connecting into a VDI session. So because those, we see VDI and, well, actually, we go that way, right, for you guys. I'm going this way for me. This way for you guys on a chart. Would go in that direction for increased growth in both VDI and thin clients. So when is thin client an option? Well, certainly there's a multitude of options. At the top there, we have kind of that hybrid server-based desktop scenario where maybe you've got local desktops and some hosted applications, local desktop and some hosted desktops. Odds are a Windows PC may be a better fit for you from a full PC. It could be a smaller PC, but it might be a more robust PC. In essence, saying, I need to do some work, but then I need to do some stuff on a server backend somewhere. Maybe you're an offshore developer, for example. I want my dev environment in VDI. Thin clients may not necessarily make the most sense because you're going to do some work local, some work remote. Down below, we kind of have this unmanaged device category. We talk about iPads and tablet devices and employee-owned PCs. Once again, they're not true thin clients because they're doing some stuff local, some stuff remote. In a pure server-based desktop scenario, we can use basically no local application whatsoever and no local desktop functionality required. That's a perfect place for a thin client. And you can kind of argue that there's thinner and then thin clients, but essentially that's where the target is focused. So, well, that was quick. All right. Well, that was thin clients, by the way. So, as I said, there's a session afterwards. So, but I wanted to, and I guess I'll go back. I want to drive the point. So, thin clients, incidentally, also offer a few scenarios, right? So I've got technology that also leverages Service Pack 1 and Remote FX. So now I got this thin client that does all the stuff server side, graphics, processor, I/O, all those fun things. What has that enabled me to do? Well, thin client all of a sudden could be the solution for your digital signage. So instead of having a local PC and a robust device, what if I hooked up a big television monitor to a thin client and did everything digital signage on a VDI session? Well, now I've got real updated virtualization, whether that's in a store, maybe at corporate, but now I've got this digital sign that's robust and I can run high-definition graphics. Thin client for POS. I've seen some scenarios where, hey, all my applications are web-based or all my applications are running in a VDI scenario. Why don't I just use a thin client and USB redirection, which is also a function of Remote FX, to then act as a point-of-sale device. I can see them in front office PCs, back office PCs, loading dock, store manager device. I mean, the needs are slowly shifting to where thin clients make a lot of sense and kind of argue, well, do I need this big thing for this device? Do I need it for a point of service or for a kiosk or a digital sign? And so that's why I talked about thin clients. I just wanted to kind of circle back on that. And we're going to show an interesting demo that I know works because we tested this around thin clients. So last topic I'll talk about, and then we'll do the demo, is essentially device management. Great, wonderful. I have all these devices, and what am I supposed to do with them, right? So Windows Embedded actually raises some interesting challenges. One of which is that embedded devices are typically customized. Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7 usually look alike. And so one of the strong points of embedded is it has that like Lego feel. I can assemble them however I want. The challenge is from a management perspective, I can't always guarantee that they have the exact same footprint. So what do I do? When I connect embedded devices to Configuration Manager 2007, SCCM, which there are a bunch of sessions on, you have to kind of group them in. The collections, for example, show them up as a Windows 7 or Windows XP device. You deploy Office to all Windows XP devices, guess what? Boom, you just blew up your Windows Embedded devices that showed up as Windows XP. So I got to fix that. Write filters we talked about. Well, there is no tool, whether it's ours or anybody else's, that manages write filters today. So how do you take care of that? I want to deploy a patch. Great. I have to turn off the write filter ahead of time. What do I do? And then, the devices are widely varied. I might have 3 or 4 different OEMs for each of those scenarios. So how do I tackle that? And then, of course, how do I update an image? Hey, HP and Weiss thin clients, they both give me their own image that I got to push out. How can I push them both out simultaneously without having to have 14 tools? I want to be able to use a centralized console. So I wouldn't throw that softball into the air unless I had a solution for you. And we're going to talk about Windows Embedded Device Manager 2011. This solution takes SCCM 2007 and extends it to managing Windows Embedded devices. Particularly in the thin client, point of service, point of sale, and digital signage categories. The idea was it allows enterprises to take kind of these embedded devices and allow you to deploy them so you can push out embedded images. You can kind of inventory and assess what's out there. So now you'll know Windows Embedded Standard or its HP thin client model, J22X, for example, shows up in SCCM. And I can also update the device. I don't need to push out a software patch or a piece of software or an application. Now I can manage those write filters. I can turn them off. I can turn them back on, all as part of the actual product. I will actually be demonstrating that tomorrow. I know that demo works. And I'll be co-presenting with one of my colleagues here in the audience tomorrow evening. And we'll be basically separating you between beers because it's the last session of the day. And we talked about that. And wonderful, time for a demo. That better work. All right.
Yeah, we'll do the thin client demo then.
Thin client demo.
That works.
All right.
For sure.
Turn me off.
The thin clients, Eric extensively talked about it, right? Extensively. So we have another session in 208 that Alexa and other guys will be presenting. What I want to show you is an ARM-based target, which is what we call a bigger board. That costs $149 off the shelf. So if you buy volumes, you can go down to $49, I think, something like that. It's running Windows Embedded Compact 7 and actually is acting as a thin client. And what it can do here and boot it onto that device is actually connect to a remote machine. The first thing I will do is connect a session with a lower broadband speed so that it deactivates remote effects on the server so that it can realize what kind of experience it can get today without remote effects. So let me connect to this machine here. I have a Hyper-V server sitting underneath here, which actually is turned on. So I should be able to connect. I'm now freaking out. So as you can see, I have a Windows experience, which is OK. I don't have Aero activated. I can eventually go to Media Player and see what media playback does. And as you can see, it's choppy, it's slow. It's really not what you want to have on a thin client if you want to do digital signage with, for example. So let me turn that off, disconnect. And I'm going to reconnect. But this time, I want to activate remote effects support. Right? So I'm going to set the experience to the best that can be done. And what I can also do is leverage another feature of RemoteFX. RemoteFX is not just about video streaming offloaded onto the server, but it's eventually about redirecting USB devices. So if you have a webcam, for example, like it's my case here, I connect the webcam to the thin client device, and that USB device would be seen in the VM OS, which is really, really cool, because you don't have to care about drivers on the device side, on the Windows Embedded Compact side. You just connect the USB device, it is redirected, and it is seen in Windows in the session for what it is. So let me connect with RemoteFX this time. And you'll see that I've got a different Windows experience, more advanced. That arrow is activated. I can start multimedia. I can play around with this kind of features. And eventually, I can stream media in HD onto the same client device. And I can continue leveraging all the arrow experience on that tiny device, which is running on an ARM processor, just as a reminder. And about the webcam that I've been showing, here it is. So if I have a look at the Silverlight settings here, webcam, I'm able to connect to the webcam hardware. I'm supposed to. Demagogues are not happy with me today, for some reason. OK. I'm not going to let me destroy with that. And I'm going to switch to the other demo, which is the let's call it interactive digital sign, or something like that, or kiosk, actually. So the last demo here, got some crappy resolution. I'm lucky today. Whatever. So I've been developing Surface application for my desktop here. And actually, it's not a desktop. It's a device that runs POSReady 7, and that boots into that application, which is my shell. Which means that the experience for the user is this exact experience you can see on the screen here with touch and multi-touch support. It leverages some controls that the Surface SDK offers to the developers. So it's fairly easy. The view with the items here is what we call the scatter view. It enables you to just add these items around and playing around with them and interacting using multi-touch. Just really, really convenient. I developed that in 15 minutes. Another point I wanted to make with this demo is the fact that you can leverage existing technologies and add some functionality to it. Imagine that Flash application, which I've been demonstrating earlier on, is actually touch-enabled now, because POSReady 7 supporting Windows Touch gives that application it's running the touch functionality, touch support. And you can see way more advanced type of application with the globe here, where using multi-touch, you can give information on a digital sign that is more interactive and more immersive, let's say. Last but not least, you can leverage new technologies to do digital signs and kiosks. HTML5 is one of them that is coming really fast, and that enable you to have a really advanced experience, a multimedia experience, touch-aware, and eventually playing media into that web page that could be your shell for your kiosk or digital sign. And the content actually is not even local, so you can stream from the internet. You can stream from your backend into a web page or into a IE9 OCX, which is a control that would be sitting into a full screen application where you would not have the regular Internet Explorer address bar and so on. So you would definitely have that as your experience on your kiosk or on your thin client. So that's pretty much it for me. I will give it back to you. These ones were working pretty much.
Thank you, Olivier. So we'll have to pay homage to the demo gods later this afternoon. So you got the idea between the RemoteFX session, right? You saw the HD graphics play through and the USB redirection. Essentially, we're going to showcase a webcam. But the best demo I ever saw of that was actually at an internal training event a couple years ago, where I walked in there and they're using an Xbox game controller on a PC and they're playing Halo. I was like, oh, I'm playing Halo. It goes, oh, by the way, check this out. And they minimized the screen, and it was running USB redirected on a server running RemoteFX back when it was still beta. So they were running full high definition 1080 frames, 1080p rather, and 60 frames per second using an Xbox controller on a server someplace back at corporate. I was like, that's pretty cool. And thinking to myself, what could I do with that, which is essentially the high-definition graphics that we saw. So, closing remarks, and then I have a video, and then you guys get to go. So, one of the things I wanted to kind of summarize about today, right? It's retail. Once again, it's all about the customer. I think many of you guys recognize this, but I'll drive that point home. And it's about knowing, serving, and protecting them. Hopefully, we saw some solutions today, maybe demonstrations at another point where that would happen. The Internet of Things is game-changing. That's kind of what the video is about. But essentially, that paradigm shift from mainframe all the way through specialized devices is changing the way customers interact with your store. Windows Embedded offers solutions for retail as well as other industries. So, we take care of healthcare, finance, manufacturing, on and on and on. I mean, you would be shocked at the number of embedded devices, in particular, which run Windows Embedded that you interact with on a daily basis as a person. And so, that said, when you're talking about solutions for your retail environment, we certainly ask that you look for Windows Embedded. There are options out there, and all of our partners, from the IBMs and NCRs and Fujitsu's, HP and Weiss, the partners are endless that offer Windows Embedded. It's one of those things you might just have to ask for it. You can also download the bits. There's plenty of evaluation processes for both Windows Compact, Windows Embedded Standard, POS Ready, so on and so forth. And as well as, please visit. We have some other sessions going on at TechEd. Here's a quick snapshot, and I'll put this back up at the end if you want. There's a session after this for Thin Client. There's 2 sessions tomorrow on Windows Embedded Standard and Windows Embedded Device Manager. And there's also some hands-on labs if you guys actually want to deploy an operating system or do some management with Windows Embedded Device Manager as well. So, that said, I'm going to show a video. And that would be all. It's like 5 minutes. And it'll take us literally to the end of session, and then you guys can be on your merry way. And it has this very, elaborate music.
Billions of water droplets suspended in the atmosphere. That's what makes up a cloud. These water droplets gather together and can stretch for miles. They affect our light, our temperature, they make up our weather patterns, they even affect our climate. And everything that makes its way into the clouds began down here, in our rivers, our lakes, our oceans. It's a natural process. Today, the way Microsoft is extending Windows and the cloud to specialized devices is quite similar to this process.
So what Microsoft is doing is extending Windows and the cloud to the world of specialized devices, which is a very natural progression, much like the clouds that you see every day. So if you look at these embedded devices, they're becoming much more powerful, much more complex, and we see a lot of data being passed from these devices to the cloud. So this is going to have a fundamental impact in terms of the way you work, learn, and play. The theory of the Internet of Things is really what's guiding our investments in platform, tools, and services that we deliver into our customers, and allows them to really leverage the true power of the cloud.
The Internet of Things is the connection of the virtual world with the physical world. The connection of the physical world with the virtual world gives us a connection that has been lacking up until now. The idea is a simple one, is connecting physical devices to the internet. We have a virtual world and where documents are being connected. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to integrate the physical world to the virtual world? If we look at what we have in the world today, we have about 5 billion cell phones. We have about 7 billion people on the planet. The number of products that have a serial number attached to it are 10 trillion objects. This is certainly daunting, but there's also an integration here of the human, one where he can participate in this Internet of Things.
What we found is that the cloud will be an essential element in making the Internet of Things a reality.
The cloud actually exists beyond traditional IT, almost by definition. There's a whole spectrum of the cloud between what you think of as the public cloud way out there, all the way to on-premises. The whole spectrum is available to any device, frankly, on the face of the earth.
I know that Microsoft has always been a platform company, but I think in this case, in the case of the clouds, it seems that it's taken a step beyond that. And when you're speaking about such large volumes of data, I think this is something new, and this is a capability that very few companies have. We want something that's modular. We want something that has a rich tool ecosystem around it. And tools, certainly, like Windows Embedded, I think are making an impact in a way that no other operating system at the moment is making. We've always wanted a tool set that we could trim or extend. And I think a lot of what we're starting to see, certainly within Windows Embedded, is an operating system that you can customize. And that's quite valuable.
We provide a complete spectrum, starting from embedded devices, on-premises computers, all the way to the public cloud. This platform is designed to meet enterprise needs. Seamless, secure connectivity from the device to the cloud is very, very important.
So this is something that we're starting to see in a big, big way. Cloud platforms coupled with web-friendly protocols are having an impact upon which revolution is being built.
The demand for embedded devices will only increase. That's why we at Microsoft have built in Windows Azure a very large storage system that can consume and store all this data.
These devices are now going to be able to communicate data through the internet back to the enterprise that allows them to drive business intelligence scenarios. And what we're seeing is that this industry shift is happening across every single one of our vertical industries, from retail to automotive to healthcare, industrial automation. They're all experiencing this shift.
This is tremendous infrastructure that we haven't had before. I think that having that fabric, having those familiar tools, really provides a starting point upon which you can enable a revolution. All of this capability is very much what we want to realize in the Internet of Things for some time. The big effort has been, how do we more transparently show the information that is flowing? As you can tell, I get excited around this topic because I think scale and being able to have those insights is something that we've been after for a long time.
Well, we're excited too, because we see a huge opportunity for our customers, our partners, and for the company. We clearly know what's going to be required to really make the Internet of Things a reality, especially when you look at the scalability, availability, and analytics in the cloud. When we think of devices, we think of the data that you'll be able to capture, analyze, and drive decisions around.
Microsoft is recreating many of the characteristics we see in cloud, but with the added benefit of controlling what goes in, what comes out, and where it goes. So the question is no longer what will this cloud do,
But what am I going to do with the cloud?
As we look ahead, the answer is simple.
Anything and everything.
And Microsoft will help you do it.